Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. Today I want to talk about self-hosting a Jitsi Meet server with user accounts. Jitsi Meet is a self-hosted audio-video conferencing system that is both private and secure. Jitsi Meet is similar in function to products like Zoom, WebEx, GoTo Meeting, or Google Workspace. Jitsi Meet runs in a simple web browser without the need to install any additional software, and that's one reason to really love it. So there are Jitsi clients for Android and iOS also, and besides the fact that you can run it from a web browser, there are also optional Jitsi Electron desktop applications that are available for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. So let's go install a Jitsi Meet server. So here I am logged into my LXD host, and I'm executing a command to create a LXD container, which is LXC launch Ubuntu :22.04. I'm calling the name of the container Jitsi. I'm giving it the default profile and then also a profile called bridge-main, which you would have to have created previously. And if you don't know about bridge containers, watch my other videos about LXD 101. And then we have limits set to 4 gigabytes of memory, and we have a CPU allowance of 20% as the cap on this particular machine. And then boot.autostart is equal to true, which means that when the LXD server boots, it goes ahead and starts the Jitsi container automatically. So right now it's downloading that container from the LXD repository and creating the Ubuntu 22.04 container for our Jitsi application. Now that the container is created and started, I do a LXC exec Jitsi into the Bash shell, and I get a Bash prompt on the container. So now I'm going to do an apt update, ampersand apt upgrade. Because this is a brand new container, we want to make sure that its repositories and software is up to date. Whenever I install a new application on a LXD container, I like to create a user account. So we're doing an add user Scott. I'm giving it a password. And then I'm going to do a user mod. We can spell user mod with correctly. -A, capital G, sudo Scott, placing Scott into the sudo group. We SU over to the Scott account, and now we install some of the basic dependencies, which are curl, gnup-g2, and wget. Type in my sudo password. Now we download the key from the Jitsi site. Next, we apply that key with GPG, edit the sources list for the Jitsi application, and paste in this deb command right here. We do a Control-O to exit the editor and enter, and a Control-X to exit. Next, we have to get the key for the Proxy component, which is the component that involves the integration of all the Jitsi Meet components. And then we apply that key with another GPG command. We edit the Proxy sources list, and we insert the following command into it. We do a Control-O and enter, and a Control-X to exit the editor. Now we do a sudo apt update. And everything's updated correctly. So we do a sudo apt install jitsi-meet. And we give it a yes. And it will go on and install all of the components of Jitsi Meet. During the installation, it will ask you for the domain of your current installation. So in my case, I'm going to go ahead and say jitsi.scotti-BYTE.com. Now you will have had to have entered this domain at your domain name service provider, so it has to be an existing subdomain that you enter at this point. So we tab down to OK, and we hit enter to continue. Since I want to use Nginx Proxy Manager and have it get Let's Encrypt certificates for my Jitsi Meet installation, when I get to this screen, I'm going to tab down, or not tab down, but arrow down to generate a new self-signed certificate, and then I will tab to OK and hit enter. Now that the core part of Jitsi Meet installation has been completed, you want to go over to your router and you want to go ahead and forward some of these ports. First of all, port 80 TCP is required for SSL certificate verification and renewal with Let's Encrypt. Port 443 is going to be required for SSL access. Port 10,000 UDP is going to be required for your audio-video interconnection in order to communicate. And then port 3478 UDP is for querying the Stun server, and it also is involved in some other communication that I'm not quite sure of, but I know that you do need it. And finally, port 5349 is a TCP port for fallback video audio communication over TCP if you've got a UDP issue. But I've still found that even with that enabled, you still need port 10,000. So you're going to want to run over to your router and take all of these ports and forward them down to the address of your Jitsi Meet instance we've just created. So in my particular case, it would be the IP address of the LXD container where I have installed Jitsi. So we want to head over to Nginx Proxy Manager at this particular point, and we want to create a new proxy host for our Jitsi. So in my particular case, I already have Jitsi installed and I have a proxy for it, but you're going to create a domain name. My domain name is jitsi.scotti-BYTE.com. My scheme will be HTTPS, and then the forward host is the address of the Jitsi server, and the forward port will be port 443 because we installed the self-signed certificate that allows the web server that is built into Jitsi Meet, which happens to also be Nginx, to operate correctly. Then I say block common exploits and WebSocket support. Now go over to the SSL tab, and you're going to go and request a new certificate. And in that case, it creates a certificate of the same name as the service or proxy I just created, which is jitsi.scotti-BYTE.com. And I go ahead and force SSL. And then I do a save. And once I do that, I probably want to come back in and edit it again and turn on force SSL, because when you create the proxy initially, it does not create that and set that. And so after you do that and you do a save and you have your instance for Jitsi up here, you should be able to click on it. And at this point, it will pop up and give you an indicator of here's the Jitsi server, and here it is now accessible on your network. Not only is this instance of Jitsi accessible on my network, but this is a public instance now since we've served it through Nginx Proxy Manager. And so we don't want to allow people to create meetings willy-nilly over here. So how do we add the user account capability to Jitsi Meet? And we do that by first of all doing a sudo su, since we have a whole series of commands that we're going to have to issue which are privileged. And then we're going to do a cd over to /etc/prosody/conf.avail. Once we get over to that particular folder, the next step is we're going to want to edit a file. And in my case, we're going to edit a file named jitsi.scotti-byte.com.cfg.lua. And basically what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to substitute your domain name in right here and then have the extension .cfg.lua on the end. We go in and we edit this file, and we're going to want to search with a Control W, and we're going to want to search for a section called virtual host. So I type in virtual, I hit enter, and it finds the virtual host section. And here we have Scotti-BYTE.com, and we're going to want to go down here to authentication where it says Jitsi-anonymous. We're going to want to change that to internal underbar plain. Now we want to arrow up here before this virtual host, and we're going to add a new section that's going to look like this. It's a new virtual host section, and this virtual host has guest dot and the name of your domain. So in my case, it's guest.jitsi.scotti-byte.com, and then we have the following data here, which will be included in the release notes. So if we do a Control O and hit enter to save the file out, and a Control X to exit the editor. Now there's an optional Proxy module, which is called storage underbar memory, and it enables a memory storage for persistent information, which includes the user session data that we're going to be including shortly. So the module source code is available from Proxy's Mercurial repository, and we're going to do a sudo apt install -y space Mercurial, and that will install that particular application. Next, we create a temporary folder, and then we move into it, followed by cloning the Proxy modules that we need into this particular folder with this command. Now we copy the Proxy modules where they're needed, and we're going to create a Jitsi anonymous domain by editing this file and looking for the section for the anonymous domain. If I can find it. There it is, the config section. And down here it says domain is jitsi.scotti-byte.com. And then below that, we want to go ahead and enter another section, which is basically going to be anonymous domain and we'll do a colon and then open apostrophe, and we're going to say guest .jitsi.scotti-byte.com. And don't forget to put a comma after this because that's going to be needed. So at this point, we can go ahead and save and exit the editor now that we have our guest domain. So I do a Control O, I hit enter, and Control X to exit the editor. Next, we're going to edit another file here in the GoTo, I guess that's how you pronounce it, SIP communicator properties. And the file we're going to, or the information we're going to put in there looks like this. It's going to be org.jitsi.gcofo.auth. And here we're going to have jitsi.scotti-byte.com, which is my subdomain for my Jitsi server. So GoTo stands for the Jitsi Conference Focus, and it's basically a component of Jitsi Meet that manages user sessions. And so we have to configure this GoTo's SIP protocol in order to handle this. So I do a Control O at this point. I hit enter to X to save it out and Control X to exit the editor. Now we're at the point where we can create a user account. We do that with the Proxy control program, and we basically say Proxy control, register Scott on jitsi.scotti-BYTE.com with a password of testing. Of course, you want to make your password more complex, and you can create more than one user if you want. And you do get this message, but for right now, this is the process. They may have an updated process in the future. Now that we've added the authentication mechanism to our Jitsi installation and added at least one user account, the Scott account that we just added, the final step will be doing a systemctl restart on Proxy, Jacopo, and the Jitsi video bridge, as well as the Nginx web server, which is a part of the Jitsi installation. When we hit enter, we should be able to get a prompt back there correctly without any errors, letting us know that everything has been restarted. So there's now really only one final thing to do in order to test this, and that is to go to https://jitsi.scotti-BYTE.com. I'll go ahead and click on my test, and it will go ahead and say, do you want to, it'll ask me whether or not I want to use my microphone. Of course, I want to allow my microphone, and I'm probably going to allow my webcam as well, but right now it's being used for this recording, so it's not seeing it. Here's our new prompt where it says, hey, we're waiting for the host. So I can say, I am the host. All right, what's your name? Well, my name is Scott. And what's your password? And I type in my password. And then it says it's connecting. And it will come up and say, okay, here, you want to save your login? No, I don't want to save my login. And it's logged me in, and I'm now the host of the meeting, and the meeting has been started with user authorization correctly. I use Jitsi Meet very frequently for my meetings, and I find it convenient to have a Jitsi client as opposed to using the web browser. The attraction to using the web browser is you don't necessarily have to install a client, but the attraction to using the client is that it has some additional features. And here's what the client looks like. I'll add the link to this download in the show notes, but this is another GitHub project, and basically it allows you to set up your meetings, and they have clients for Windows and Mac OS and also Linux, both in the form of a Linux app image and in the form of a Linux deb file. And I think that if you have another Linux OS, they'll let you go ahead and build this also. And it also has, as you can see, FlatHub builds as well. So in summary, Jitsi Meet is private and can perform end-to-end encryption. When you self-host your own Jitsi Meet instance, you have no concerns about data privacy and security. And in this video, we learned how to install Jitsi Meet in a LXD instance, which is a best practice for maintenance and configuration control. And in addition to that, we also learned how to restrict Jitsi Meet meeting creation amongst authorized users. So be sure to watch my videos on LXD containers and networking to build an infrastructure to deploy and manage your self-hosted applications. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell, and we'll see you next time.